I'm going to call on the next speaker, Samuel Oghale Oboh, who is going to talk about nuances and nudges, nudging economic sustainability and stewardship in Nigeria with cues from Canada's architecture. So he's going to be talking from implementation, actualization, and PPP projects from an architectural lens. Samuel is going to give us a presentation. I will welcome Samuel now. Before I welcome Samuel, Samuel is the Vice President of Insight and Architecture. He has an expansive career spanning over 25 years in the built environment and is the first African Canadian to be elected as president of the Alberta chapter of the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada. He's also a former VP at ACOM Canada Architects Limited, a Fortune 500 company, and president in 2015 of the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada, and a recipient of the Presidential Medal and Distinguished Fellow of the American Institute of Architects. Samuel, you're welcome.
Oh, thank you very much. And first and foremost, I'm not a finance expert. I'm not, into PPP, and I thought I'm going to be talking about, very interesting examples, with cues from, architecture. So the first thing, I want to do is, just to not to repeat what my my fellow panelists have said, but to go straight into, into some of the aspects of this, because there's no much time. I'm going to be focusing basically on some of the nuances that makes PPP a success, but without necessarily going into the technicality of PPP, which other people have addressed. I mean, in Canada, we call it P3 projects. Not going into that details, but to actually look at some examples of strategies that led to various kind of success. So as I mentioned, earlier, there are a few, disclaimer, right, that I would like to talk about. And this, these disclaimers are definitely, something that is very important, just to be very straightforward in terms of what we're giving out. Architects do know one or two things about sustainability, about excellence in design, and how to enhance quality of life. But I have, like I said earlier, I'm not a finance expert. I'm neither an expert in stewardship matters or behavioral sciences, which I'm going to kind of talk about. Stewards, I'm actually glad, some of the things that Chidi had mentioned. Chidi had mentioned some things that borders around stewardship, and I think it's really very, very important, to look at that. As architects, we have a lot of experience to share with people. Just take a look around, some of the inspiring buildings around the world that has been created, and then, secondly, the views and analysis and opinions expressed here does not necessarily, is my views and my opinions, and do not necessarily represent, any agency or, featured entity that I may be talking about. And thirdly, because this is a sophisticated audience, as Kede and Esosa had mentioned to me, I hope, it is harmless for me to make some two basic, assumptions. And, some of those, assumptions are, before I kind of, proceed further, the first assumption is that we have an audience, of experts, right? That is knowledgeable about African matters, and also that Nigeria has vibrant, creative, and resilient people, right? And we're also aware of the antecedents of, governance, right, in Nigeria. And then the second thing is, I'm hoping that, the audience have actually encountered similar quality of architecture, that we have in Canada here, and hopefully on a profound and intimate level too. So by personal and intimate architectural encounter, I'm actually referring to experiential awe. Chidi talks about infrastructure deficit. Infrastructure deficit is also a problem here in Canada. But one of the things that we actually deal with, we look at the qualitative aspect. Chidi, Adesua, and also Francis actually talked about what we will call quantitative aspects, things that you measure quantitative, but there are also the qualitative aspects, of some of the things that we do. And things like experiential and awe inspiration, right, in public facilities, the idea that, good design has to be used for all that is really very important and very instrumental in the long-term viability of such a project. And when it comes to P3 and PPP, the viability is really very important. So I really want to focus on that aspect, just a very small significant aspect that we use to create, something that is very inspiring. And most times we really talk about, intimate, and personal, even though they are public facilities. And when I talk about that, I'm not really referring to the colorful interpretations some adventurous mind might ascribe to the ambiguous terms, like personal and intimate. And I'll say we should go easy on the Marilyn Monroe kind of thoughts, which, by the way, we actually do have a project like that in Mississauga, near Toronto, which is almost like a P3 project, that was done there. And it's something that is awe-inspiring. So just as a kind of context, right, this is probably what I think a lot of people believe Canada is like, right? It's always cold and wherever, but it's actually, it's a land that is full of a lot of, P3. This is actually an interesting project that was done way back, right, in the 19th century in Banff, which was actually done through a public-private partnership through some of the rail line CP Rails, right? Is a hotel, is the Banff Springs, hotel. And diversity really matters to us, right? In Canada. And this is a good example for Nigeria where diversity is seen as a negative. Here in Canada, we are strong, not in spite, but because of the diversity of our heritage. So we have people of various backgrounds, various tribes, various aspects that that makes it interesting. And some of this diversity, right, is expressed in our culture. It's expressed in different ways where we know that diversity matters. And I just want to lay a lot of background. I'm not going to go into the technicalities of P3, but to leave everyone with a concept, just a very small, minute aspect of what we've done, right? That is distantly related to P3, but essential to the success of the P3s that we've done. So expression is really very important, and similar to the richness of the expression, that we have, in Canada, we have various types of expression. They are verbal, linguistic, you can name it, all sorts of jargons and cliches. And from a stereotypical point of view, if I'm allowed to gamble, many in this audience may not be able to relate to a mathematical expression, which is a finite combination of symbols that is well formed according to the rules that depend on the context. Of course, this is definitely, a type of expression, but there are also facial expression. And when you talk about facial expression, right, is an aspect, that is enthused with diversity, right? And it's definitely something that we are all very used to. Don't look too far. If you want to understand facial expression, look no further than our former first lady to our southern neighbors, right? What a facial expression can mean. But there's also political expressions, and activism, right? Which there's a lot of them. There's expression, when it comes to fashion expression. I mean, Nigeria is actually the home, right, to all that. And you can name it. And as long as we humans are concerned, the varied expression, and as architects, we tend to we tend to have that kind of expression, when our fees, right, and when we're not able to get our fees paid, or when we're old and all that. Now, with all that said, right, what am I talking about in expression? It's something that we use in architecture a lot. Expression in architecture is really very important, and it's used to actually share some of the communicative, attributes. And architecture is an expression of values, and it's used to communicate memory, but it can also communicate value and sense of place. For every P3 projects that we do, this is actually very important, that because they are all long-term projects, the sustainability of that project is dependent on your ability to communicate, right, values and sense of place. And because architecture is an expression of, is a symbolic abstraction of societal value, it is important, that this is expressed expressly in every P3 project. Now, to give an example of this, one place you can see this obvious connection between architectural expression and societal values is in the fall of the Berlin Wall. When in 1989, right, transparency was very important, to the German population, and the concept of a transparent state was very seductive. And because that transparent state was very important, when most architectural projects and P3 projects that took place, in Germany during that period had to reflect that societal value of transparency. And one place you actually see that is in the design of, the German parliament, which is the Reichstag, right? And which was done by Norman Foster, a British architect. Because of that transparency, right, the Reichstag dome was completely made up of glass and 360-degree view of Berlin. And I'm trying to show this, that there's a connection between what we call our values and what we actually, see and reflect in the architecture, right, that we provide. So when visitors walk inside the dome, right, they're able to see the double helix spiral ramps, and, the debating chambers is actually on that, can be seen, right, below. And that actually, interestingly, created a lot of problem for the German, politicians, because every time the debating chamber is actually quite empty, everyone thinks that the members of parliament were not working. They had to do a lot of education, public education, or awareness to say, look, members of parliament sit on committees, they have all sorts of things that they do, so they don't always 24 hours debate in the chambers there, which was actually quite interesting. So I'm going to skip through a whole lot of these because I kind of wanted to provide background, but what I was trying to look at is there are a lot of public-private partnership that has happened in various forms, and some of them express a lot of value. The Sydney Opera House is definitely a masterpiece that communicates something that is very important to the Australian Sydney people, and is very expressive. Another example is the Calatrava City of Arts and Science in Spain, in Valencia in Spain, right? So there are actually a lot of this. Now, architecture embodies, expression, and expression connotes communicative attributes that are inherent in our design. And these are actually some of the bases that make some of the P3s around the world to be very successful. And sometimes these expressions can be considered, loud or noisy, right? Depending on, how it is. So when you talk about loud and noisy, most times as architects, our role in P3 project is almost like we're whispering, while, other times, we whisper the qualities to the finance people that are actually ahead, that some of the projects that you're doing will probably not succeed if you don't, consider some of these aspects. And when I talk about whispering, right, one of the things that I know is that whispers are quite powerful. And whispers remind me of, Muhammad Ali, fight. And many of us know, for instance, in 1971, an undefeated Muhammad Ali faced the heavyweight champion, Joe Frazier. And in what many call fight of the century, after a full grueling 15 rounds, the winner declared Frazier, as the winner, and he defeated the undefeatable Ali at that time. And then come 1973, right? Muhammad Ali faced the heavyweight champion Ken Norton, and just like Frazier did a couple of years before, Norton defeated, Ali, and even breaking Ali's jaw in a 12-round slugfest. And then enter the ring, George Foreman, which many of us here, without giving up our age, are actually quite aware. I mean, like this George Foreman was a menacing, dangerous 6'3", 220-pound, machine that struck terror in the hearts of men, right, who fought for a living at that time. So first, when George Foreman met with Joe Frazier, the first man that beat Ali, George Foreman knocked down Frazier 6 times, before the referee had to stop the fight. Then he met Ken Norton, the second man to beat Ali, and the man broke, Ali's jaw. So George Foreman, right, interestingly, right, really, really was somebody that was fearful. So when the Rumble in the Jungle was announced in Africa, it was to be an epic battle of ages. George Foreman was, versus Muhammad Ali, and this was way back. Yeah, I think it was October 30th, 1974, when that happened. And, that night was, when it finally arrived, most of the people, in Ali's dressing room, the dressing room was so quiet that it's so quiet, like a funeral here, that even Ali, himself had to, ask why everyone was so quiet. Of course, the reason was so clear. Everyone feared for Ali's life. So when this fight started in the beginning, the first round of it, Ali traded punches, and soon, he began to, feel the pounding, right, of George Foreman's, huge arms. And of course, the first round went, and Ali goes back to his corner. What he did was to actually think, through a lot of things. He felt the punishing power of Foreman's punches. And one of the things that happened instrumentally at that moment was Foreman changed, he lets Foreman, to continue to pound his body, and then he changed his strategy. In the 8th round, Ali sees a sliver of opportunity, and in an instant, he did the impossible. He knocks out the mighty George Foreman. But how did he do it? Ali did not beat George Foreman with his fist. He beat him with his mind, with what many call the rope-a-dope tactics. People at the ringside will later recall, right, that Ali was whispering into the ears of George Foreman. Ali was asking George Foreman why he was doing most of his punching with his right hand. He was taunting George Foreman, right, and taunting him, saying he must not have, a left hand. And so, just as Ali's left side was actually starting to go numb, George Foreman's, punches, George Foreman had to change because of the whispers. He changed, to his, to his forehand, and that led, Ali to gain that moment of opportunity. So, the question, here is that I can imagine the $64 million question that on everyone's mind, that what does this anecdotal detour has to do with P3 and the nudging of economic sustainability and stewardship in Nigeria? Well, it's kind of, interesting, that the whispers that Ali did is what, it's a type of nudging. And those little kind of nudging are things that, governments and schools and marketers and people in different parts of the world are actually, using, right, to make, changes. They're using small nudges to gently steer people towards making more positive decisions in their lives. And that's something that we've applied a lot to a lot of P3 projects. With those whispers in Foreman's ears, right, Ali nudged Foreman to make a small change, that earned him the heavyweight title. So the idea of voicing sustainability and stewardship and excellence in Nigeria together in the same breath may sound preposterous, right, to many. But with the knowledge at our disposal, I would like to make an alternative case that, for a people persistently subjected to failures associated with a sovereign state that looks like a geographical arrangement, as Oboh described Nigeria. And, for a country that is actually well endowed, right, with a lot of resources, there's no reason for us to talk about, what Chidi mentioned as infrastructure deficit, which, by the way, is actually happening every part, of the world. But the infrastructure deficit in Nigeria is definitely very obvious. So that's why, P3 is definitely something that is very interesting. And the question on our mind is, how can we make, economic sustainability, stewardship, and excellence achieved, in Nigeria when it comes, to P3, that we do? The answer might just be from the lessons from Ali's and Foreman fight, which is, so like Ali did in 1974, I believe that, the government and people of Nigeria can benefit from the use of the power of our own whispers to steer the country and the continent, in the right direction through, good governance inspired, by lessons from, architectural world. There's a lot, right, to look at. For instance, as architects, there are lessons and, as practitioners in the design industry that we've actually looked at. And some of those lessons, we've actually applied, right? In other words, we know that good design is actually good for P3. So before you submit all your, business case, finance proposals, to Francis and Adesua, and all that, it's always very important to look at, the importance of good design. But we also know that, right, when we nudge good design, right, this is nudging, at its best. And that might just be the answer that Nigeria needs. So let's look at some, real life case studies, here. And I'm going to be very quick, about it because there's so much to share, on this particular topic, but without really going too much into the detail. Stewardship excellence in Canada, our public works department is a very good example of case study. This is the department that carries out most of the P3, project in Canada, and I was very fortunate to lead this, the Architecture and Engineering Center of Expertise, for the federal government, for almost about 6 years. And during that time, we did, practically, a case study. We know that public buildings are a reflection of who we are as a community, is actually a physical expression of, the architecture of a nation. This is where a lot of policies are debated. This is actually where a lot of things happen. But at the same time, through several researches, and this is, research, especially in the UK by the defunct Commission for Architecture and Built Environment, right? How buildings perform over time, right, is something that has been looked into, right? We realize that good design is something that make, things work, but good design remain the most reliable prerequisite for achieving best value in any public-private partnership. So the term good design is quite subjective. I'm not going to go into that, but defining it in few words is an uphill task. So for the purpose of this presentation, good design, I'm just generally talking about a balanced combination of efficiency, effectiveness, and economy of means, right? Which my previous panelists have actually talked about. And even though good design is a key predicator of achieving efficient and effective, P3 project, it is not always a guarantee, right? The experience of many communities, is that, a project can be functional with all the quantitative aspect of it, but yet, right, the project, is not really serving, their need. So, projects are founded on good design principles, despite the fact that we know that these are the things that give us best value, right? They are never, a given. And why is that? A glimpse into the field of behavioral science might just help us understand why. Several behavioral economics have actually revealed that, consumers are not always rational in their decisions. So this is not anything that is just associated with a country like Nigeria or Canada or wherever, that we as human beings, we are not rational, right? That when we are given options, most time we gravitate towards, the irrational, aspect, of every option that we're given, and we make poor decisions when provided good options. So based on that, we kind of looked at this Canadian public sector organization that looks at a public-private partnership. And it's very glaring that this department looks at $7.3 billion, facilities, every year. And then vast majority of the costs, are usually spent in the life cycle, of the project, and several research, and studies have demonstrated that the impact of reducing operation cost, which is actually very important, can be made through, the design process. So when you look at what we're looking at, as architects, when we get involved in P3, we're actually involved in less than 0.5% of the life cycle. However, a lot of the costs in P3s are in, the energy and maintenance, in the construction, in the operations, and the operation.
Sorry to interrupt. How long would you?
Just 5 minutes, and then we'll go. All the other things we'll just go into.
The panel. Yeah. Okay.
Yes. A panel conversation. So I'm kind of laying the groundwork for this whole stewardship, that good design must be valid and deliberately championed. And it's also kind of important that, when we look at scope, cost, and time, right? All these aspects of it are really very important. So if we've always done, things the way we've always done it, we always get what we've always gotten. So, right, it's really very important for us to look at it. Now, when I talk about nudging from behavioral scientists, now this is kind of, laying the groundwork, and I'll kind of connect it, at the end of the day, right? There was an experiment in Schiphol Airport, where we kind of wanted, to address, a persistent problem in the male washrooms, right? Where they have to hire a lot of people, right, to be in there all the time cleaning because of the cleaning standards. And in the male washroom, because, there's always, problems where they have to bring in a lot of people all the time, right, to get that done. Now, in order to solve the problem, they put in people, right, to clean the washroom every time, but men, right, it's always happened.
Samuel, please, can you do it in 2 minutes, please?
Yes,
yeah?
so this is very important, this aspect, right? So because men love to aim, right, we came up with a very interesting, we etched a housefly, right, we hatched a housefly, there, and the housefly that was hatched there, because men love to aim, that solved, the problem. Now that fly that was hatched in the urinal allowed, the men to target, and that solved, the problem. So in Canada, when we did it, we created a nudge, which is called the Stewardship Excellence Protocol, that we use for a lot of P3 projects, and it's actually based on a whole lot of protocol, that created it. And in so doing, it created a lot of the projects, that gave rise to the good design, that provided, a whole lot of things. And this is an example of the research lab that, good design did. We can go into the technicalities if there are questions, at the end of the day. But how does this translate to the Nigerian concept? Nudging is not a new concept in Nigeria. Every day we are subjected, to nudges, and we know why we fail. But stewardship is really very important, and we do that. I'm not going to go into this other case study, but I laid the groundwork here, for some of the aspects, insignificant aspect of P3 projects, where we use nudging as a strategy. There are lots of things that we can do to nudge, good design and good aspect of it. We can do the nudges, right, at the end of the day, and we do it. So there are quite a number of projects, that we did. We use all those nudges, right, to nudge, the solution. And I'm submitting to everyone here listening, right, that we can use nudges, right, in P3, just, taking the cues, right, from a lot of things, that we did. And I think I'll answer a lot of questions during the back, because usually there's actually a lot of groundwork, but it's really very important to know that these nudges are, something that is actually, very, very important. And whether is, the Norman and Ali fight, right? There's a lot of lessons that, when we nudge and steer people in the right direction, just like, the Barack Obama administration used it, everybody is actually using these nudges. And in P3 projects, this is an example of a P3 project that we used quite a number of nudges. I can go through all the nudges that we put in place, to get them really, really done. So thank you very much, for your time. There's a lot of questions. I know I had to rush through a number of some of these concepts, but hopefully we'll be able to answer some of those things, during the question and answer period. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Samir. That was very interesting. And coming from an architectural angle, you've shown us a lot of things and the importance of actually nudging and using our cultural aspect. You've also talked about how to do it sustainably, excellently, and having that stewardship in place, that good design is actually good for PPP or P3, and looking at the importance of good design, and also the importance of researching and how buildings perform over time. Good design is based on efficiency, effectiveness, and economy of need. So it's a key predicator of achieving a P3 project. And it's not always, some projects are not always, even with good design, some projects are not always guaranteed. But what you are trying to tell us, or not just to us, is that we have so much in Nigeria or Africa to use as our design, just like Canada has done.